Hi real writers, this week we're going to talk about the difference between intrigue and confusion. I've had a couple of weeks off, had to attend a few funerals and that sort of stuff, and I just wasn't in the mood to do videos, and this is an important little thing for you. You'll see things on forums where people say, I'm so depressed, I need to get the motivation to get back into writing. You don't, unless it's your job, and if you do, you pull on your big person pants and you do your job. But if you're just writing, take time. Do the mental health cleanse. Make sure you feel in a good place. This isn't compulsory unless it is your employment. So give yourself space to breathe, give yourself time to reconsider and come back to what you're doing. I just took a couple of weeks off, a few funerals, bit of a loss in the family, just didn't really feel like putting together videos. But now I do. So now I'm back to talk to you guys, the real writers. Like I said, we're going to talk about the difference between confusion and intrigue. I've got some notes, so I'm not ignoring you. I've just got my notebook. First thing, let's talk about confusion, or the things that, if you don't have these in your story, will bring about confusion. Confusion comes about when a person's understanding isn't on solid ground. It's okay to show contrasts. Dogs walking backwards. If all the dogs are walking backwards, you're going to go, wow, okay. But if it's not that obvious that dogs walk backwards, if just you suddenly see some things that are wrong with dogs, you may call into question. So confusion comes about from a lack of clarity. The strange thing you're seeing isn't even clear. Then there's poor organisational skills. The strange things aren't really well organised. Some things happen over here while other things happen over there. There's no organisation to this unusualness about it. Even if you don't have a really far out story with dogs walking backwards, if you just have a normal story that you want to have intrigue, but the story isn't well organised, so these unusual things just appear as bad writing. They don't appear as being interesting flavour bombs, like that little bit of an extra salty sauce. You just go, wow, they've used too much salt, because it doesn't make sense. It's not organised. Also, excessive jargon. I find this sometimes with sci-fi or fantasy, where there's the Hugin and the Wugan people and the Hokkahugans and there's all these strange names that aren't based in like a Germanic language, which English is like a Germanic-based language, or a French language. And there's all these weird terms, and they have weird weapons, and it just seems to be weirdness for weirdness' sake. Or you'll get into a military type story where there's lots of weapon references and jargon and scientific jargon for jargon's sake, that doesn't really move the story along. We'll also add confusion because people try to remember whether it's a Hugin or a Wugan or a Neo-Wugan, and because they spend their time trying to sort out your jargon, they're not left with enough space to get through your story. And if they can't get through your story, or the story's not making sense, as soon as people stray off the path of making sense, it's really hard to get them back. They're going to just stop following what you're saying. This is the other one too, it's ambiguity. If you're too ambiguous with your language and what you're saying, and you think you're being sort of clever, this is away from that, we'll say, bad writing stuff, which is like bad words and being unclear and your story isn't well organised. But if your hints at something being strange or being unusual is too ambiguous, and people don't see it, and then they only see part of it. Let's say there's 4 strange things in a row, and they only see the third one, and the first one, they think, well, how do we get that leap? Because the story is just too ambiguous. Over at Write Act, which is a little school, I'll put a link below. It's a little community I visit every now and then, and they have a monthly writing challenge. I wrote a little monthly writing challenge this month. They're a bit of fun, and there was some mental illness. This man was hallucinating that he was seeing his dead wife. Everyone got that point, but they didn't get the point that he was willing to maintain his mental health, or poor mental health, so he could keep seeing his dead wife. That was lost on them. They didn't, and that was my fault. If something's lost on your audience, it's our fault as the writers. They didn't quite get that whole, his grief was so bad, he saw his mental illness as a gateway to pleasure, that he was going to get to see his wife again because he was grieving so badly. I was a bit ambiguous, so avoid that ambiguity. An inconsistent tone as well is another thing that can add confusion to your story. Make people go, what's happening? We just had this really hard-boiled, gritty crime thing, and now it's feeling like a light musical. I feel like I'm watching Grease. Or it's inconsistent in tone within the characters. So it's a let's say hard-boiled crime again, but everyone's light-hearted, quippy, throwing little catchphrases around. Or they're all adults, but they're speaking like teenagers out of a John Hughes film. Or it's a John Hughes type film, but then you've got Brick, haven't you? A John Hughes film where everyone's using the language of a gritty crime show. So it's more like Brick. Inconsistent tone will also make people confused. They'll break from what they're supposed to be seeing. They won't see it. And the last one is a lack of focus. Why are we seeing this ambiguity? Is it ambiguity, is it inconsistency? Is it this mystery for mystery's sake? It doesn't focus you on the story. It takes you off on these tangents. You start worrying why hobbits have hairy feet rather than think about the ring and travelling to Mordor. Suddenly you're just losing focus. The good thing you need to have with information flow, and that's what we're talking about here, how we flow information to our audience. Information flow must be consistent. You give it to people as they need it, at pace. It's timely. It fits into the story where it needs to fit, and it should be in context. You can take one quick thing out of context and people will go, oh, okay, maybe that's going to be a payoff. Maybe that's a setup and I'll get the payoff later on. People will see something strange and go, oh, and that's the other thing I did in this story. I put an opening which wasn't truly in context. I was ripping it off from Stephen Knight, the writer of Peaky Blinders and all that sort of stuff. In his film, Dirty Pretty Things, it starts off with an argument between a couple in a taxi, but the story's really about the taxi driver. So I just ripped that scene off mercilessly. I had a husband being really horrible to his wife in a taxi, and it turns out this taxi driver is the man who's missing his wife. So when he's talking to, and that was a setup, so when he's talking to his deceased wife later on, he's talking about how could that man treat his wife so badly because he could not conceive treating his wife poorly. I didn't get that across. Again, it's these little monthly challenges. My problem, ambiguity. It also must be consumable, which is removing that jargon, making sure the information can be consumed. It's in a way that people can engage with it, they can consume it, they can bring it in, they can think about it, they start to put the world together. They start to build things. And I've just had a chat recently, and I'll put the name of the person up here in the comments for the sci-fi edition, episode edition. In the sci-fi edition, this person up here, and I had a good conversation. We spoke about world building, and I spoke about the use of pastel, which is in the book. But pastel is how I think about things. And he said he started off, when he builds his worlds, with the culture, what people value in the culture, and their social culture. So the culture and what that culture values. And he works out from there, which is a great way of doing it too, just like when I use the pastel. But that's because that puts that into a consumable way. It builds a framework around the unusual thing you're going to be given. You now understand this is a patriarchy. So women hiding things when men come into the room might make more sense now. You can put it into a context, and that's the last one, context. When you give them information, you make it consumable, and it must be in context to the story. So his world-building approach and my world-building approach puts a frame around this unusual thing. So what we're talking about now is taking WTF to intrigue. Intrigue is good, confusion is bad. The three letters you don't want people to use when describing your story is WTF. So thank you to everyone who's been commenting. I've been having so many good little conversations lately. Thumbs ups are really fantastic as well. And subscribe if you want to get more of this sort of stuff. That would be really, really good as well. You can get the t-shirts. That's one. There's the book. 2 books and the logline book. And I'm going to be changing my lower third. I'm closing down Griffiths Creative and going towards more of a little of a production mode. So you'll see a different thing, a different name, different logos, those sorts of things, because I'm starting to gear up towards maybe producing some of the smaller indie films that I've been writing for, but getting some cash together and hiring actors and making them myself. So you're going to be seeing a start of a production company soon. Okay, thank you everybody, and remember, keep writing. Bye.